I just want to start out by saying good morning and thanking you folks for all coming out. We put together today a group to discuss the 1965 tornado, which was 45 years ago on May 6th, and it was towards evening. I think the first class will probably discuss their stuff about what time, I think, about 6:27. We'll go on from there. I think I'll just go ahead and introduce each one of you first, then we can come back and then you can, tell a little bit about your deal here and that and what you have done with this. So I'll start back there. Robert, we always called you Bob Aldrich all the years I've known you, so we'll just say Bob Aldrich. Is that all right?
That's all right with me.
And he was Chief Search and Rescue with the Fridley Fire Department. And next we have Todd Krause, who's with the National Weather Service. And we had enjoyed visiting you one time out there. A very nice setup you have out there. And then next to him is Alan Taylor. And Alan, I think he was just kind of a young fella when this all took place 44 years ago. Wrote his book on it and reread a lot of great researching. So I'll let you tell about that a little later on here. And then Ellie, Puumala. Did I get that right? Puumala.
Pretty close.
Okay, Puumala. Right? Puumala. Okay. Anyway, Ellie was a survivor and lives up in the Spring Lake Park area, up by Spring Lake there on a Hillview Road. And I'll let them tell their story and what you did. And I guess you were a nurse, weren't you?
Yes, I just graduated and my first job was going to be at Mercy, which opened early because of the tornado then in May.
Oh, okay. Why don't I just start back with Bob Aldrich. And Bob, you tell us a little about what you do, rescue, that search and rescue, and how things went that first night for you.
Busy.
I'm busy.
Typically, Thursday nights are a drill night for the fire department, so we had a little jump on this, in that some of the people were already at the station. And we had one call that we had to send a piece of apparatus down near FMC to help a guy that got caught up in a fence down there. Then the main blow came through and kind of stirred things up a little bit, so we got to be terribly busy. A number of interesting things that did happen. We had a roof of a Methodist church sit right on the road in front of one of our fire apparatus as it was responding, and they had stopped to fasten the hood back down, so hadn't they stopped, they'd have been wearing the roof of that Methodist church.
I was wondering when you first started like that too, and we'll get into that with the weather gentleman here, Todd Krause there, on how the warning has changed over the years, because I think back there we just already got sirens in here working, one up on Spring Lake and one over in our Pinewood area, and some communities around us I don't think even had.
Well, that's the interesting thing, the title of the book there, the night sirens blew, they didn't blow in Fridley because there weren't any.
There weren't any. Okay.
We found out the hard way.
Yeah. We'll just move on then, and we'll have Todd, would you go ahead and describe your job and what you do down there? I saw a lot of screens down there. I know you must do more than just sit and watch TV all day, and weather patterns.
Right, and weather forecasting and issuing warnings has changed a great deal, of course, even over the last 10 or 15 years, let alone 44 years. And you think back to 1965, and for 20-some years, the Weather Service would actually have a machine at the office where they could sound the sirens. And I even have an article from the St. Paul Dispatch that shows a picture of one of our meteorologists back then acting as if he was sounding the siren. You can see his finger on the dial, ready to set off the sirens across the Twin Cities. And so that was something done back in '65 for the tornadoes, except in Fridley. However, no longer does the Weather Service activate the sirens. It's all now up to the individual cities and counties, and they're the ones that sound the sirens themselves.
True, no, I thought I heard since I retired out was that they have individual county way of warning, so that we used to, the whole metro area got a whistles. Now they can do it by counties,
I
like
think it's
an
gotten even
open.
more selective than that. They can get down to isolate individual sirens.
Oh,
Yeah, you can sound it
So the
just for
warning is much-
one siren if you need to. But for storms, they're going to activate the sirens over a pretty large area, at least over several cities, usually over half of a county, maybe even an entire county. The days are long gone when sirens used to sound over the whole 7-county metro, for one tornado. They are much more selective than they used to be.
oh. Yeah, that's,
Well, I think also that they've got a better job of being able to determine just exactly where the storm is going to be, and because of that, they can be a lot more selective.
I was wondering too, Todd, about that, back there, and we'll get into that when you researched it on that stuff, Alan, but I was thinking, how where them cells are coming, but they're only potential, aren't they, or cells for tornadoes, so you do have to kind of warn a very fairly large area, don't you?
Yeah, you still have to warn for a fairly large area, and it's still selective, and Bob is absolutely right. We know an awful lot more about where the storm is going, where the tornado might be, and because of that, we're able to narrow things down quite a bit. And the other thing that's changed is a lot of our understanding of tornadoes. Back in the 60s, there wasn't really all that much known about how and why tornadoes form. Now there is a lot more understanding. A lot of the research that's gone on has really helped to clarify where we should put out our warnings. And because of that, if there's a tornado that touches down, we'll have a warning out 90% of the time. And when I came into the Weather Service some years ago, you were lucky if you had a tornado warning out before it touched down. Now, the vast majority of tornadoes come out or touch down, and there's already a warning in place.
Now, those little radios like you demonstrated to me out there, newer, more updated little radios, and I think you brought one with you or something there on warning, and is that sounded from your weather place, or is that by WCCO, or?
Well, the National Weather Service operates radio stations. And so nothing but weather all the time, 24 hours
That's
of
right,
nothing
I
but
remember
weather.
switching to that now.
So-
It's so different, yeah.
So very exciting, you don't get commercials or anything like that, but
Yeah.
it's just nonstop weather all the time, all day, all night, weekends, holidays. And the neat thing about our radios is that if we do think we need to put out a warning, we hit the button on our computer and it goes out and gets onto the weather radios. And if anybody has a weather radio in their home or business or wherever, that weather radio will sound off with an alarm and let them know that there is a tornado warning or a thunderstorm warning or something like that. And so these are, people think a lot about sirens, but the siren doesn't tell you anything why it's sounding. Not only that, but sirens, you may have the windows all closed, you may have the air conditioning going. A siren may be a mile away, the wind can carry the sound of the siren away from you. What about the people in rural areas where there are no sirens? So there are many, many reasons why weather radios are a good thing.
Better than.
And what happens when we when we send out a warning, we will press the button and send out the warning, and the weather radio will then actually sound like this. It'll have an alarm just like this. And that's a
That
great
should
way.
wake us up.
Yeah, that'll wake you up, and it does. And the neat thing about those is that it's just like the smoke detector for storms.
Well, that's
And
great.
so you can get your warning straight from the National Weather Service. You don't have to be watching TV. You don't have to be listening to AM or FM radio. You know, you don't have to have the computer on or anything like that. You can just have this radio sitting off to the side. It's doing nothing, minding its own business, waiting until we issue a warning. And when we issue a warning, it'll sound off like that. And that's how people can get the warning straight from the Weather Service,
Yeah.
whether there's a siren anywhere or not.
Well, back to me in 65, most of us listen to what I was going to refer to, WCCO or one of those radios or TV, and that was how we got it. And we were all having a big old scout meeting in what they call Spring Lake Park Lutheran Church at the time up here on Highway 10. And the fella comes running in that listened to the radio on his automobile and said that there's supposed to be a half a dozen tornadoes, something like that, dancing around. I think we better call her. And it was a dinner that we were having, and we had a fella out by the name of, I forget, attorney, anyway, you know, speaker, but we just told him he had to cut it, and we all
Yeah.
headed home.
Yeah. By the way, I should add on, people can buy radios at many, many stores that sell radios. And some of the real big name stores carry these weather radios. Or those that like to buy stuff over their computer, you can buy them online as well.
Yeah. What I'll do, I'll just go right on through, and then we'll come back around, you know, and you just think of something that we need to talk about and stuff, because that's what, it's kind of an open panel here, and I'm just emceeing, and I don't want to do all the talking, so.
While we're still on this, I was gonna
Yeah.
ask him, does this radio be on in your home all the time then? It's always on?
Do you have to have it plugged in, or,
It can be, the
Battery?
weather radios operate on batteries,
oh, battery?
if need be. But you can plug them in to save on the
And
battery.
just leave it.
Yeah.
And just leave it. You don't have to be listening to weather all the time.
And expense-wise?
And expense-wise, anywhere from $30. Some of the local grocery stores are selling them
I
for around,
noticed Rainbow has it.
for around $30, as does Cub.
Yeah.
Those are the two big grocery
Yeah,
stores that
yeah.
carry them for around $30, but prices can change. But some of the really top-notch radios sell for $60 and $70.
And you don't need to have such an expensive one.
Correct. But you do need to have one that has an alarm.
Yeah.
And the best alarm is to get one where you can sound it off or set it just for your own county. In the old days, these weather radios, 20, 30, 40, 30 years ago,
Yeah.
they used to sound off for storms 100 miles away in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And so everybody would get off and shut off their
Shut
radio.
it off, and then that was it. I'd
But-
put that, yeah.
But now you can buy a radio that can sound off just for your own county.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's
I
great.
think one other critical issue on the, talking about the warning, people have to understand that the siren system is only an outdoor warning system. That's all it's designed to do.
And you're supposed
If
to
you're in
turn
your
on
home or wherever you may be, you can't rely on that as being the warning device.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to Alan Taylor, a teacher from Cambridge Park, is it?
Champlin Park,
Oh, it's Champlain
Champlain
Park. Oh, boy, I'm in trouble when I said I put you further
District
north.
11.
Yeah, and he did a lot of research on actually the 65 tornado, and put a book together. So I'll turn it over to Alan, let him tell about his and how he got involved, because I know you were very young evidently when this happened.
You know, the research has shown that when you're young, if you have a big event, that tends to predict your destiny. And when I was 6 years old, living south of Mora, you know, we were in the country area, and one of the reasons I remember that night was, number one, I remember that, you know, it was a weird sky all day long. And for a kid to notice that, it had to be really strange. And we were coming back from the Dairy Queen. there again, that was a rare event back then. You didn't go out to eat every day like you do now, or 3 times a week. And so the Dairy Queen was a big deal. And it was my sister and I and my dad, and we lived, south, and so we were facing south, and we lived on top of a hill. And going back, my dad said, what the heck is that? And we looked up, and it looked similar to a shade being pulled over the sun. And it was complete blackness. And green lightning, red lightning, purple lightning. The skies were boiling. I had never seen anything like it. So we got home and turned on the TV, and the entire metro area was under a tornado warning, and tornadoes were being sighted everywhere. And eventually, later on that night, one of the storms came north, hit Bram, hit Mora, and then went east and hit Grantsburg. And the reason why we know they were connected was the next day in Grantsburg they found a ton of debris from Fridley and Spring Lake Park, mail and bills. And so the storm had carried the debris 80 miles. And it was later found out, Joe Strube found that they found debris as far away as Pennsylvania from this storm. So it was an ideal storm. It was perfect in its setup, and about 5 years ago, I toyed with the idea of writing a book, and I found out that there was no book. There was no book written on it ever, and that was really a surprise to me because it did affect so many people. So I began my research, and I met a ton of nice people along the way. I met Todd here, and I met Don, and I met several people at the Fridley History Center, and I had their support to write the book. And a year and a half later, here it is. And, God had a huge hand in it. I mean, if it wasn't for him, the book would have never happened. But, it's interesting because I've interviewed many, many people. And through the absolute destruction, there were good things that ended up happening. It drew communities together. I can't tell you how many stories of miracles I've heard where, tornadoes are devastating, but so many stories of, survival. You got to remember that we had 6 major tornadoes come through the metro area and only 14 people died. That's amazing. And one of the reasons why, and my wife came up with the name of the book, The Night the Sirens Blew, they were installed in metro-wide in 1959. And this was really the first case where they used it for storms. And people went to their basements. They heard it, and a lot of people I interviewed, they thought we were being bombed by Russia. They really did. And so people got down low, and that's one of the helpful hints, in violent weather, that you need to get as low as possible to save yourselves. But unfortunately in Mounds View and so many other communities, Don told me afterwards, after the tornado went through Mounds View, they found a piece of wood lodged in the siren at City Hall. So no one heard the sirens in this portion of the city. So very unfortunate. But I'll tell you, it's been an adventure. It's been, I've been able to, I did it for 3 reasons. Number one, I wanted to write a book because there was none out there on it, and a lot of people's stories needed to be told. I based it on a donation model. I've donated a ton of books to all the local libraries, to all the history centers in the area, and also to present some type of healing, because I think there is some. I was at a conference here last weekend at a church in Mounds View, and you could definitely feel some healing by people getting up and telling their testimonies of what happened, during the storm. And stories of people coming together helping each other rebuild. And it was very moving.
I want to thank you, sir. I really enjoyed, I picked up one of the books from him, The Night the Sirens Blew, a historical account of May 665, and I thought it was really great. And in there you listed the people and so forth that had died during this tornado and stuff. So often people bring that up, and I think we had half a dozen people here in the Mounds View area. One was a fellow named Clark, and I know she mentioned him in the book. Now, I don't know if he was just out as an observer or what he was doing, but it was right out here in Tenway. He got blown off the road. And
That's an incredible
what
story.
he was doing driving around, I don't know.
He was initially at the Fridley Junior High School at some event, and one of the tornadoes came and hit the school, and he survived. He rode it out in his truck, blew out all the windows. Truck was bouncing up and down, and it hit the building. Nobody injured, and he called in to WCCO that night, and Charlie Boone and Dick Chapman were talking with him, and they were asking him questions, and that's in the book too. I left a ton of websites where you can access all this information. But anyway, the recording goes on, and they ask him, well, I'm Robert Clark, and I'm okay, and I'm feeling okay, and, well, you be safe out there. And then he hangs up, and later on that night we find out that he was killed when the second tornado came through. And he was driving home on Highway 10. And,
Right out here, yeah.
yep. So tragic, just
A lot of stories like that in there. In your book too, when I was taking Ellen around town, and I remember one of the fellas, what a sense of humor, the next day after the tornado, you're going through to write up, the damaged homes and find out where people are and all this kind of stuff. Fella put a sign in front of his place, open house. There was only a basement left. And I wonder where he found that sign. I thought, what a sense of humor after you lose your home, But I guess a lot of people just roll with things, don't they?
Yeah.
And like in Fridley, I was looking through some of the old articles that says here, like 500 in a school and a twister hit, and they sat in the hallways. And it said here, the instructor's telling about this, the band instructor, they were having some kind of a spring arts and craft fair there that night. And he said, junior high kids, you would think they would be, pretty excited and hard to handle. He said here in the article that they were very easy. They didn't panic and stuff, and sat up against the wall, and I guess roofs were going off them schools over there, weren't there in your Fridley area?
Yeah.
And that. So it's amazing when you read that, that the children even are.
Well, I met the assistant principal at Spring Lake Park High School, and he was a baseball coach. And they were out coaching, and they seen the tornado coming. His name was Don Myers, long since retired. Nice man, nice family. And he got him inside the building, and it was a glass corridor that went between the buildings, and that's all the time they had to get into. So they get in, the windows are bowing, and right before the tornado hit, all the trash cans lifted up and started floating down the hallway. And then it hit, and all the kids were safe, Strange.
I'm gonna go along here now to, as we go along here, we'll come back to you folks here. And I didn't want Ellie to be sitting here listening. I want her to tell us about her, because she was one of the survivors, and where you were, I understand you were RN there, nurse. And,
Well, I don't have any drastic stories to tell like Bob over here, who was in
Yeah.
a fire truck probably and rescuing people and doing all kinds of other things. I was just a mother of three. And it's interesting for you to say about this Mounds View siren. There was wood in it and it did not sound, because I don't remember really even hearing much of a siren. And I really don't know why we went down the basement, because I'm always very inquisitive about things, and I like to watch things. I like to go out and watch the clouds in the sky, but there was something about the sky that day that just wasn't quite right. And then I think it was the big wind that came up, and we were watching TV, and that's where I sort of got my idea that something is going to happen. And I did take my 3 and my husband downstairs to the southwest corner where the water well was. Could have gone in the water well, that would have been nice and safe, but we stayed in that corner. And it just sounded like a freight train. I had no idea what it was.
Yeah, that sound
I
like-
don't know if I was
sound like
dumb
a
or
freight
what,
train.
but I was dumb in many things at that age of my life. But I didn't know what it was, and it was like a freight train. Then things got very, very quiet, and Mom said she'd go upstairs first to look, and everything seemed fine up there. It was just very dark and very still. So I motioned to the rest of them to come up, and then I knew what had happened. That we have a little library. Spring Lake Park Library was there on the corner at the time, and it had picked up the roof. It had lifted up right there in front of me and picked it up and dropped it beside me and then went on. So my house on Hillview was all spared.
Fortunate, huh?
But then it dropped down again across the highway and wiped out some homes there. So the Lord had spared us. And it's very true on what Alan says about things like this, and you know now all the hurricanes that have been and all the stuff that's going on in the world today. It does bind people together, and people do find unity, and they help each other. Look at right here, South Dakota, North Dakota, the floods and stuff, all the waters and everything. And I just been watching my television, these poor people that are floating in water there, and the help that comes from all over. It's I don't know if it's the Lord's talking to us through these things or what, but we are survivors, and I'm thankful to be here.
Well, good, because I know you worked with the Mercy Hospital.
Yes, Mercy was just in the process of being opened at the time.
Yeah.
There were 3 or 4 doctors there in May, and I was a new graduate, so I didn't know if I wanted to traipsy down to the emergency room and all of a sudden get thrown in with people coming in with
Yeah.
injuries, because I was brand new at this, and I just stayed home, I guess. I didn't go. Then I started there in August, and I was there over 40 years, so
I know, I
I
was-
guess I put my time in.
Looking at, here's a, kind of turned yellow over the years when I was digging out some of these old articles, and I noticed, Alan also had it in his book, but that casualty list, when they talked about in the paper back then, about 13 of them and that, and then they listed them and what hospitals they were in, and it's amazing, like this, out of this area, how they had to run clear down to Fairview, down in Minneapolis, you know, and, St. Mary's Hospital in Minneapolis. I think it's just like Bob there in Fridley, you didn't have a hospital around hardly, but Mercy was it? And,
That wasn't open yet.
and,
Unity was under construction.
It was
at the
under-
time.
and Unity was just being built.
At that time, North Memorial based an ambulance in Fridley in the fire station.
Yeah.
And the majority of the people that were handled out of Fridley, if they were handled by the Fridley Fire Department or Fridley Police, they went to North. But those major catastrophic events like that develop a phenomenon that's called you all come.
Yeah.
And every emergency responder within 100 miles is there. So now you have no control over what's happening, really. Communication just becomes a mind-boggling, horrendous problem. And because of that, you really didn't know where the people were going. You couldn't really keep a
No.
handle on it, because if the Bloomington squad picked them up and Smith Ambulance from Minneapolis was on that end of the incident, they went somewhere where nobody knew, you know. And trying to pull all that together became a huge problem after it was over.
Yeah, we, when you stop thinking about it, it's something that you just couldn't plan for, and I remember the small police force that we had here, were running people in all directions. Neighbors were hauling people to the hospital. So the next day here at our city hall, we had to sit down and find out where the people were, because people are calling in from Duluth and Hibbings and Crookston. Oh gee, my kid lives down there, are they okay, you know, and this and that. So we had to hurry up and get a list like this made up. I know myself, when I came over that evening, I was serving as a young mayor at the time of the community, And, you know, you're just baffled what to do. I got over here, the telephones weren't working. I tried to find our chief of police and our law enforcement people. I went over to the area. You couldn't find them because they were all running people into hospitals and stuff, everybody they could get a hold of. So very fortunate there was a couple councilmen, one living over in the area and another one, that went through and kind of inventory, went through the homes and stuff, checking it out and stuff to make sure everybody's in there. I got on the phone and I called down to State had emergency office down in St. Paul, and I called down there because we needed to close the area off, and I'm sure, Bob, you had this same problem there in Fridley. And I was so surprised later that evening, a Carl Rovog in a Jeep with the National Guard military type came out and set up for us and closed off the area so we could get, the next morning we'd have the sightseers, you know, and all that type of stuff going. And I think you probably was at Fridley too. Going back a little bit on that, I would like to kind of talk, maybe you gentlemen, when you research this thing, we always think of it as a twin city, you know, kind of Fridley, Mounds View, Spring Lake Park tornado, but it actually started touching down, way down the road, didn't it? In your research there, Todd, maybe you can fill us in a little on that. Wasn't that green way
Yeah.
down the road?
Yeah, it sure did. The first tornadoes touched down way southwest of the metro area as it was at that time. You know, down by Green Isle, Norwood, Young
Green
America. One of the tornadoes actually went on the outskirts of Glencoe. So you had some tornadoes way to the southwest of Minneapolis and Fridley and Mounds View proper. And one of the tornadoes went up from west of Chaska up to the west side of Lake Minnetonka. Another tornado went from Chanhassen up to the east side of Lake Minnetonka. And then the 2 or 3 that hit this area came up, you know, Golden Valley across Fridley and up Spring Lake Park or Mounds View, and so there were in the record books. If you go back and look, there are actually 6 tornadoes. But just like we didn't know all that much about tornadoes then, we know an awful lot more about damage surveys and what we need to do and what we can learn from and what we can look at back at the radar. And I would expect that there were many more than just 6 tornadoes. If a proper damage survey, if we had known really what to do with damage surveys and how to correlate it and compare it with the radar, I'm sure there would have been many more than 6 tornadoes.
I think they said too, wasn't there a potential possibility because of the kind of cells of 22 types of deals that built up that it was possible? I think that was your
24.
research or something?
Yeah.
20.
Joe Strube wrote in his memoirs that there were 3 separate waves that came through. And after the first wave came through, that vented all its energy back into the second wave. And at least 24 images were seen on the radar. But I agree with Todd that, you know, we'll never know because I interviewed people where they were down around Chaska and they had, you know, a tornado that took out their grocery store, you know, the mom and pop shop, and it was never really recorded, you know. And a lot of tornadoes came down and went back up, and Rob Brown, he worked for WCCO and he was on maneuvers at Fort Snelling, and they called him in, and as he was going up the Minnesota River Valley, he said he saw a dozen cones going up and down.
Well, that's what I was wondering too, because like I said, we were at this church up here, and when Lee Erickson come in and told us about it and stuff, and then we broke up and we went home, and it was almost getting close to 7 o'clock or somewhere in there before I got out. But there was already lawn chairs and stuff up by the road, you know, the Silver Lake Road that we would go down home there where I live, in that area before, I mean, the big one. So they must have been bouncing around up there, and then Fridley like Bob there, you must have got hit, what, it started out where in Fridley's and way down Mississippi there at the university?
Well, if you can picture Fridley as a long, narrow chunk of ground from 37th on the one end up to 75th on
Yeah.
the north end, and go through there diagonally from about 44th,
Yeah,
run a diagonal line from that point over on the Mississippi River over to Highway 65. That whole band was taken out.
for me, coming out of Fridley, I was standing in my driveway and see this big black cloud coming out. That's probably the one over by Moore Lake that you fellas had a picture of.
Yeah.
Somebody over there gave it to me, I remember. Anyway, I think I beat my wife, like I always said, down the basement when I see that thing coming, and it sounded like a freight train coming. And we got down the basement and stuff. Well, then later when we were very fortunate. I had one little hole, like somebody took their finger and poked it in my roof. That's all I had where I live. It went further, kind of like northeast, cut across, come into Mounds View over here on a Knollwood and H2. There's a Messiah church, and there was a little store there called Kettleson's, and it wiped that store out, I guess, pushed cars right into the window, it seems to me, when we were going around looking. There was a little old lumber yard the fellow was moving out of, and he got killed there because they were moving at the time, the Octaker, and Walter's name was, and they found him, I guess, in brush and trees on up. Well, see, Mounds View was very fortunate. Out in here in those days was what kind of open woods, and it just leveled the trees. And then it came across another church right up here, a Methodist church called Sunrise, and it wrecked the Sunrise Church there on the county road here. Well, then what do? They must kind of, Todd, bounce up again for some reason. I don't know if the air, what caused that, your cells or change of air pressure or something. Then, when it hit over on Lois and Hillview right there and Knoll, and that's where that picture comes that you'll see where it really leveled it out and looked like a bomb, went through that area. That bouncing back and forth, Todd, could that be something to do with your cells or something, air up and down pressure? Or?
Sometimes. That's one of the things that you read some old weather books from years ago, and it talked about how tornadoes would skip and jump like that. But nowadays we know enough more about tornadoes, and one of the most common types of tornadoes, and as I look at the couple of photographs of tornadoes that we have, is that it struck me as being very likely a multiple vortex tornado. And what that is basically one circulation, but then around the periphery of that circulation you have numerous little vortices swirling around, making up the actual tornado. And so I think that really is why a lot of the hopscotch damage occurs, is because one house might get leveled from one of these
Yeah, it could be right across the street in
subvortices.
Mounds View. One would be leveled, the other one,
Yeah,
maybe just a shingle
from
off.
one of these subvortices, and then that vortex didn't happen to hit the house next door, but it swirled around, or another vortex hit the next one on the other side of the house. So you would get hopscotch damage, and I've seen this in a lot of my damage surveys that I've done over the over the years, is that the multiple vortex tornado can result in that kind of hopscotch look.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to Bob and you fellas and stuff, probably just like here in Mounds View. Like you had a lot of the guardsmen too come out and help you to set up the security part of it, because we just didn't have the law enforcement in those days in little communities and that.
Well, yeah, the police department, probably was 10 people back then.
Yeah,
That's, for a city that size and with that much going on, that's not enough. But the unit came down from Anoka. That was the guard unit that was
Noka. And ours
activated
came
to
out
come
of
down
St.
here.
Paul.
And they were in probably the second day to get in place and set things up. But you mentioned earlier, one of the problems is closing off a community. And that was one of the first communications we made to the dispatch centers, was to shut down the highways into Fridley. And they won't do it. It just isn't going to happen where the state patrol's involved.
Yeah.
And I had a heavy rescue squad working with us up in the trailer court. And I got a request to send somebody down into the Midland Co-op area, which was just south of Highway 100 in Main Street at that time. And I sent the Columbia Heights Heavy Rescue Squad down there. It took them 30 minutes to go from Osborne Road and 65 to
I
Highway
remember
100
flat
and Main
tires,
Street.
yeah.
No, just getting through the people.
Yeah. I remember here in Mounds View, somebody tried to cut through too, and they got flat tires, I guess the wood had the nails sticking up and stuff. We had to have the state came in, we're very fortunate that there was a state highway building right over there, came in the next day with us and picked up the nails and stuff with one of those magnetic type of deals. And we had to clean the roads off first, was one of the first things. I recall being mayor setting up a pass system next day there, and I wanted to go back in myself, and the guardsmen wanted to see my pass. I had to come back, make myself my own pass to get back in, and I thought that was very nice because that was the toughest thing, you know, sightseers, people want to come around. I suppose Fridley had the same thing, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, it was amazing, you know, and Bob, I'm sure you encountered this too. With everybody I spoke to in the book, they said the looters were out before it stopped raining. The looters were out in force. And, you know, back in 1965, I would have thought that, you know, with the times the way there were more values and more families and more family type morals, you know, that wouldn't have happened. But no, it was terrible.
Other than mentality, it says the insurance company's gonna pay for it, so
Yeah.
That was
people
true.
didn't really feel they were stealing, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, because I remember two young boys carrying air conditioner from one of the apartments. Said that, oh, well, the guy said the insurance would pay for it, and I thought that's still no reason to be, you know, taking it. After the tornado, we were talking about, you know, like, and I looked at one of these old newspaper articles, and it shows the cleanup and how the people went right in cleaning up. And once you know, the first picture here, and here's Richard Krause, I call these guys Krause, watched the looters and damaged homes on Knollwood Drive in Mounds View. And then there was Delbert Mortensen burned debris at his home in Quincy Street in Spring Lake Park. David Berg home, it shows it again in Mounds View, just the basement part. And we interviewed these people, they still live there. There's 4 families in a row my age that are still living in their homes there. So I had them on their patio last spring, and we visited and stuff. And they were talking about, she said something, one of the ladies, that they told us to get in the bathtub, you know, or something like that. And she said, I'm sure I'm glad we went to the basement, she said, because my bathtub was about a block away. And the stories you hear, like in your book, about the people who blew. We had actually, they picked up a young man, he blew clear out into the swamp. Just, you know, bruised up and stuff, his arms and stuff were in bad shape. But how these people even survived, and that there weren't more deaths when you look at that. And again, it's, I guess, getting below ground, that basement's the main thing, isn't it? And even today with all the tornadoes we have, it's still stress going to the lower ground. Not to drive in your vehicle, to even get out and lay in a ditch if you're getting muddy or wet or whatever, and hang in there. And then we used to say to go to a certain corner. Todd, you don't do that anymore, do you?
Yeah, long ago, it used to be where the rule was, go to the southwest corner and open up your windows.
Yeah.
And that, the wind, you know, fooling with the windows is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that the very strong wind of the tornado can then get into the house. And then that strong wind lifts the roof of the house off from within.
Yeah.
And so opening up the windows is actually makes things worse. And the southwest corner, sometimes that might be okay, but really the best bet is wherever you have in the basement, where you've got the foundation deepest up against the earth, is going to be the best bet. You know, a lot of walkout basements, for example, you wouldn't be standing next to the walkout basement door, you'd be on the other side of the basement. And whether it's in the southwest or the north or whatever, it really doesn't matter. It's wherever you can get in the basement that's going to give you the best shelter, and getting underneath a desk, underneath a workbench, underneath something, because all that debris is going to cascade down into the basement.
Now, is it true, I heard recently about instead of getting out of your car, or instead of getting out of your car and going to the lowest portion, to stay in your car? Have you heard this?
There
Yeah, it's
is,
changing it now.
that's just starting to be put out there by some people, but not by the Weather Service
Oh,
yet.
so it's still get out.
So the Weather Service, it's still better to somehow get out of your car if you can and get into some sort of building. That's far and away the best bet.
Or a ditch if you're out in nowhere.
Well, a ditch, they can be problematic if you've got power lines overhead.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that. So maybe a culvert or something like that, assuming that you're not getting flooded with rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the real answer is to be aware of the storm warnings before
Yeah.
the tornado even comes along.
Even being in your basement's scary,
Yeah.
you know. They tell such stories over there is that they heated with fuel oil and the tanks broke and stuff, and they'll tell these stories that their feet, they stunk the fuel oil when they got done with this. They thought it was water in their home and that and stuff, you know.
There's a
Here's some
display at
real
the,
wild ones, yeah.
there's a wonderful display at the Minnesota Historical Society.
Yeah.
And they have a basement set up, and it's got the old radio, and they recreate the environment of the 1965 tornadoes, and I would recommend anybody to go down there. I've been down there 10 times, but it's fantastic, and it's exactly the way it was. You know, you hear the debris flying over the house and the rumble and the trees falling down in front of your basement window and the green sky and the hail, and I mean it's all there.
It is, when we're putting this together, I was working with Jerry Scally's the one that organized this. I was supposed to be part of the panel, but he couldn't make it today. And we went down there to that historical one. If you've never been, it is just so realistic. After I had sat in my basement and had a tree come down, you know, and all that by it. And they did that almost identical to where I was sitting in my home and had that happen, you know. And it's, how they did that. And the one I always amazed me when I was young was that how they ever did that Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, you know, and a little dog and all that stuff, and it's kind of a good show, but it shows you how we've improved over the years. And I'm sure Kansas still has their tornadoes.
Yeah. Although the interesting thing about that movie is they got a lot of the science right.
Yeah,
on
how they did
tornadoes.
that too and made that tornado and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
It's
it's
amazing.
a fascinating story.
Yeah, they did some very good work. But anyway, going on here and stuff, so that moving along, I don't know if you people there, you got questions that you would like to ask there? We can start right here with gentlemen. Go
Well,
ahead.
in the aftermath, Alan had mentioned the communities coming together. Nowadays, when there's a disaster, we have counselors and chaplains and pastors
Right.
and all. What took place in '65 in that respect, in the aftermath of bringing communities together or helping the healing process like a counselor would do?
I don't think we had as
Not
much of that as we did have people jump in and help, you know. Here at our city hall, they brought food and clothing and stuff like that for the people because they were out, you know, didn't have anything. I myself knew Joe Carth, our senator, called over to Washington and visited with him. He sent Jerry Christensen, who used to be one of our history teachers but got active in politics, was over in Washington. Sent him over, and then he took us to Minneapolis around the area and found HUD homes for the people and stuff like that. And the people themselves started helping each other locate their families, their people, and clean up and stuff of that nature. We had back in those days a group here that met at our city hall, and I think Bob, you probably had the same thing, Fridley, they called it civil defense in those days. They had nothing but an old bread truck with a few, you know, communication radios and odds and ends in there. And those men were right over there in our area anyway, helping clean up and organizing. And they were surprised how people just jumped in, you know, and helped search for each other. We had the Boy Scouts over there next morning, found a little kid, you know, that was blown away and stuff like that. It was really tough.
I imagine the Salvation Army showed up. They're so good at that.
Yeah, I was very surprised. The Army came right in with a truck and made sandwiches the next day already for the people. We left them into the area. And the Red Cross eventually came, and we set up the Red Cross in different ones here in our city hall. And I think in your area, wasn't it, Bob, didn't they have the roller rink and stuff? Kind of like a disaster
No,
area?
most of it was set up across the street from the fire station there on
From the fire
University Avenue.
station? Yeah.
Salvation Army was there, the Red Cross was there. And we had already been involved to some extent because the Mississippi River had crested twice on us in April.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we still had people out of their homes in congregate care when the tornadoes went through. So we had shelters that were open already. Redeemer Lutheran Church, for example, still had people living in there.
Oh.
So we were able to get some of the people organized a little bit faster and taken care of faster. As far as any organized crisis debriefing or anything like that, there wasn't much of that available back in those days. People didn't know about that and didn't do it. And I think the catharsis for most of the people was just getting back in and starting to clean up their mess and being able to talk to their neighbors and so forth.
And we had to follow up, and you probably the same thing. I had to get a hold of, we went to a meeting with emergency management, which we had in our own state, and we got federal funding to help clean up our community. I think ours was close to $86,000 or something to help you clean up here. You had to know how to write that. We had a very good attorney in those days, evidently, that knew. He wrote it up. I used to have a copy of it. I don't know what I did with it, but he was telling about the rats and all this and that to the federal government. I thought, there's a good man. He knew how to write that thing up anyway, so we got funding to help clean up our communities because of the health situation.
The two stories I remember, to answer your question about that, is I know of a family in Mounds View where the father died 2 years prior to the tornado. So as a mom raising her kids, and they lost everything. They lived on Lewis Drive. And it turned out where, you know, a couple months later, wood was donated, all the supplies were donated to build the house. Volunteers came in and they rebuilt the house for nothing. I mean, that's one. And then the other story I can think of right off the top of my head was in Fridley, the 3 tornadoes had come through, and there was a house where the phone still worked. The house was gone, but the phone still stood on the table, and it still worked. And there was a line of people, 3 blocks long, waiting to use that phone, and the owners were generous enough to say, yeah, call whoever you need, you know, take your turn. And the bill was astronomical. But then Northwestern Bell forgave the bill when they found out why they were doing it. So, you know,
Oh, okay.
what neat stories, you know, of generosity, you know.
To help out on that, it just struck me, I remember one of the young men thanking us and stuff because he was one of those young men that was upstairs or something, and Mom had chased him, and they landed on the front yard or something. They were okay and everything, telling me that he always appreciated the people in town who picked up all their clothing and laundered their clothing for them and everything. And I think that are, you know, close to the heart stuff. When people go out, you know, pick up your clothing for you and then wash it and return it to them. And he said he was so grateful for that. And you know, a lot of the clothes had to be thrown, I found out later, because it has, what is that, insulation got into it? One lady was telling us. She washed the kids' clothes 3 times, still couldn't get it out. Our
Interesting
insulation.
thing about it, you know, the gas company had just done big promotions on outdoor gas grills and these outdoor gas lights.
Yeah.
And you know, those were all sheared off, and you could smell gas anywhere you wanted in Fridley, natural gas. But we never had a fire start from it.
Well, that is amazing, isn't it, we didn't
Absolutely
have
amazing,
fires,
yeah.
didn't it? Really, when you start.
And it's a
to
good
think-
thing we didn't, because we were busy doing other things.
The water, The gas, yeah, I remember them running around with the maps here in City Hall, trying to figure out how to shut the water off over there and stuff like that. We weren't, like I say, the plans weren't there. It's amazing how many of your employees and citizens just worked from the seat of their pants and got the job done. It just amazes you that, you know, it did turn out as well as it did. How people jump in and help one another and work things out. Do we have any more questions from you folks out there? And
I have one for Ellen. Is your book available for purchase?
Yes, yes. The books are available at Bob's Produce
Oh, they are.
in Fridley,
Okay.
and also at the Fridley History Center, and then Shaw Floral in Fridley, and then at the Minnesota History Center in St. Paul, and then privately through me, you know, through my website.
Good, thank you. I have a question for Todd.
Mm-hmm.
This tornado sirens, they're used to signify a tornado, of course, but how about severe weather? And
Well-
what constitutes severe weather?
When it comes to weather, and I'll use the proper name, the outdoor warning sirens can be sounded for very strong straight line winds, hurricane force 75 mile per hour winds. So tornadoes or very, very strong hurricane force straight line winds. But I should mention that, you know, back in '65, you know, the sirens, you know, had been thought of beforehand, you know, as I understand it, as being there for potential war. This was really the first time they'd been used for tornadoes or for any kind of weather. And so over the years, in the 40 years since, they've been used for tornadoes so often that people have come to think of them as being tornado sirens. But they really could be used for a whole host of reasons. If you go up driving by Monticello or Prairie Island nuclear power plants, you'll see sirens there in case something happened to the power plants. Any sort of hazardous material reason, a whole host of reasons why the sirens could be sounded. Mostly people think of them as being tornado sirens, but there are a lot of reasons those sirens could sound.
I don't know, Bob, when we were younger, the old civil defense, wasn't that because they were worried about a war to start that siren system out in the first
Oh,
place?
sure, that
Seems
was
to me.
air raid. That was
We had the old
air
civil
warning
defense
system,
trucks, and in those days, we were teaching our children, you remember, to duck and cover, and we were putting supplies in our schools and stuff in
sure.
case of a nuclear war. And that's why,
It's
it
been
was
an
called civil
evolution, you know.
defense, and then it's showed its
And then
name's
it
changed
got-
over the years. Now I think it's called emergency management. We went through, you
I've,
probably will with the old, we had a civil defense group here, I know you probably do, Bob, with your fire department.
No, we never
You
had
didn't
one. After I became director, we got federal aid to purchase units that were part of the civil defense. They had to be used for the then civil defense before they changed the name of it.
And one of the neat things, you know, you talk about civil defense teams where citizens could just volunteer and help out. That still exists in many ways. There's something called the Citizen Corps,
Yeah.
where you can volunteer with law enforcement, with emergency management, fire. There are many, many opportunities that people can volunteer, and that's through something called the Citizen Corps, a really neat organization.
Yeah, I recall them training, what were they, tornado spotters? I don't know if they have such things today, but the civil defense group would go out and watch the sky and then report in and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there are many, many weather spotters out there. In fact, years ago, there were probably just a handful, but, and in Minnesota, the weather spotter program didn't really get started until the late 60s after the 65 tornadoes. The first weather spotters ever were back in the 40s down in Oklahoma and Texas for, I think, the Army, if I remember right. But anyway, since that time in Minnesota, weather spotters have really become widespread. So there are now thousands and thousands of them around the state.
There is. And that's one of the programs that did stick around.
And we provide training and just about every night, March and April and into May, are weather classes, and we will often have 40, 50, 100 people. Last night, we had a class in Fairmont, down along the Iowa border, and I'm told that there were going to be about 100 people that had signed up for it. So just tremendous interest in storms, continuing to this day, and people still helping out as a weather spotter or in a whole host of other ways with the Citizen Corps.
That sounds great.
I have a question for Ellie, from the health standpoint. Now, when I wrote the book, I found out something interesting that they have a term at the Weather Service, direct and indirect fatalities. Now, if you died during the storm, you were counted as a fatality, but if you died a week later, you were not included in that count. So, we had 14 people that died in the storm, but we had a tremendously high injured rate, 683. Ellie, when you were working at Unity, Mercy, did you find that there were long-term patients that did succumb to injuries from the tornadoes?
Yeah, there were some, and I could never figure out why they didn't go back to that initial disaster, because that's actually when the injury was. But yeah, there is the instant death, and then there's the one that comes, later because of the disaster or whatever hit that person at that time. But see, I didn't see Mercy didn't really open till August. So whoever was treated there, the bad ones, we had to send out right away. They had to send them out right away. It was only the very simple things that could be treated there. They were not open for trauma at that time. Fortunately, they took care of just the minor types of things and then sent them home.
Yeah, they listed Mercy Hospital,
they?
Coon Rapids there under the hospitals and that, but most of that, I think, no deaths, but
No.
tended injury type of thing.
Injury only, we had to send
Like
everybody
they say, there's
out.
400 injuries in the paper.
Yeah.
I don't know how they got that tally even. That must have been a lot of people, that were hurting. Very fortunate weren't
Yeah.
killed, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to know how they came up with some of the numbers of the injured.
Sometimes, same way they have 13.
Yeah, 13 or 14.
Yeah,
It's
it says
hard to
13
say
died, yeah.
direct versus indirect. But I should chime in that the way the Weather Service looks at indirect deaths is not so much whether it's a month or two later, because if a person succumbs from injuries a month or two later, they're included nowadays. I don't know about 1965.
Yeah.
But
They are
nowadays,
now.
they are included if it's a month or two or even many months later. The notion really comes from, let's say somebody is driving along and a week later runs into a power pole, or they're clearing and cleaning up some of the trees.
Yeah.
And the chainsaw, and all of a sudden a branch hits them or something like that. That's more in the cleanup phase, as opposed to the tornado having directly caused that death.
Dr. Harold Brooks down at the Storm Prediction Center down in Norman, Oklahoma, he specializes in fatality counts and correlations, and he has a mathematical model. And when I spoke to him about the 1965 tornadoes, and that's where the damage count comes from, and he prorated it at about 45 to 50 fatalities instead of 14. It should have been in that area. And it was very similar to the tornado that they had in 1999 on May 3rd, and it was the 10th anniversary 3 days ago. And that killed 45 people, 1.2 billion in damage. And that was the worst tornado in U.S. history. So that ties that tornado with us being the worst outbreaks in U.S. history, is one storm. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Well, I think we've kind of covered everything. Is there any other questions or? They're,
I was just wondering if they're all doing their work today and what kind of work they're doing in their title. If you're still working or you're retired.
you
Because we
wanna,
appreciate what
I
you
didn't
do.
think, Mom, are you retired? Tired anyway.
A little bit, yeah. Well, I was a career firefighter for the city of Fridley. The last 13 years I was the chief, but I've been retired now since '91.
Thank you.
And I work with the National Weather Service, and I'm sure it'll be a few years before you know, anything, I even think about that.
Yeah.
So it's many years ahead in my future.
So you were fairly young too when all this happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about the same age as Alan.
Mhm.
I'm a math teacher. I teach at Champlain Park.
Part.
And I can guarantee you that in the math mix, we talk a lot about tornadoes. And a lot of math in tornado research. And I've been teaching educationally wise for 21 years. But I'll be chasing and studying tornadoes all my life as a hobby.
And I worked at Mercy for about 42 years in the oncology department. So I'm a retired RN. I caregived for my husband for 22 years in a wheelchair in my home. I no longer do that as I'm a widow. But I've been helping out. I help Jerry a little bit with his wife once in a while, and I have little things I do because I do miss it. Even though I'm old and retired, I still miss it.
That's great. In my lifetime, besides being mayor, working with emergency management, I was one of these old timers that worked with what they called civil defense back when we were teaching children to duck and cover in schools and putting supplies, shelter supplies, and I was teaching shelter managers, and later on my job was running around in counties to make sure they were starting to put plans together for all types of emergencies. And I'd run emergency exercise. Sometimes I would use maybe a nuclear truck out on the highway here, or down in Scott County I used a tornado because I was very familiar with it. So I'd write up these scenarios, and then I got to, you know, fire departments and law enforcement and all the people in the, a lot of times on the county level together, and then we'd run it. And it was mainly just so that people, you know, bring you together for such a thing as this, make it a little easier. And
And that's still
Very-
being done. Those type of exercises are
Yeah.
still being done. And
it was very,
tabletops, there will be one just in a couple days I'm going to be involved in that, where the simulation is going to be another bunch of tornadoes going across the Twin Cities.
it was very interesting work, and I got to know people all over the state doing that, working, you know, and it fit right in with what I experienced in life, you know, so it helped me a lot to do that. But that's what I did. And I am one of these people, I don't know when to say no. I started out, this community started out in 1958 from a township, served on the first planning committee, and I'm still serving on a cable committee. Served 20-some years, several times as mayor and councilman. So I think with all that, we could tell you a lot of stories then. But I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to come in, Bob and Todd, Alan, Ellie, and for taking the time. We really enjoyed listening, and I know you can, you know, you get something like this going, you can talk for hours, can't you, about storms and this type of thing. Thank you.
Think about.